Oh, why am I in Dill Pickle Co-op? Pardon me. Let me fix this. Okay, let's fix. Right. Hey. Welcome, folks. So for everyone in the room, we're just waiting for the other entrance here. We started shortly.
Eric with Interpreters Co-op, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so our question, if we're going to be doing a simultaneous interpreting, my colleague Josue Alagna is also on the call. There was a mention of a second channel for Spanish speakers. Not sure if you have a meeting set up already or how you want to handle it. I don't see that in this version of Zoom that we have the interpreting channel built in right now.
Okay, yeah, I'm not seeing that option either, but I can certainly quickly generate a second meeting channel.
Great.
As we'll have the number to call in, that'd be fine, right?
Yeah, or if you can put the link in then we'll log into that one to interpret, and if Spanish speakers who want to listen on that one and listening on this one with their mics muted.
Okay.
Like you might say for about 5 minutes after. So.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we will be beginning shortly. Here, 5 minutes. And give me just a moment. Okay, Eric, posted those details for you.
Great. Did you want me to go ahead and make an announcement in Spanish for anybody on the call right now?
Yes.
Ok, sí, buenas tardes a todas las personas, los oyentes que son de habla español. En la ventanilla del chat hay el enlace para escuchar la interpretación, el audio interpretado de los intérpretes. Estaremos interpretando esta ponencia, escuchando en este canal del inglés, pero si prefieren escucharlo en el español, por favor copian y pegan el enlace que está en la ventanilla de chat y ahí estaremos interpretándolos. All right, very good.
Okay, I think we're going to get started. Let me just send this link to someone who's supposed to be participating. 1 second. Okay. So thank you all for coming. This is a great turnout, and we're really looking forward to today's conversation and from to learning from Mike. So I guess I'll just start by saying much of what was said in the invitation, and that being this is intended as a workshop. So if you want to take notes, or if you're just going to capture it all, and I think Mike has some really great tools to help us understand how time banking is used and can be used at this moment. However you want to capture that is up to you. I do believe we're recording this, so you should know that. And again, this is a conversation, a workshop that is led by the collaborative, which Mike Strode will explain a little bit more about the organization, but it's also in conversation with Solidarity Chicago, which is somewhat of a kind of a new organization organized by some of us in Chicago who've been doing work in the solidarity economy and came together at this critical moment, recognizing that we were trying to figure out ways to bridge some of the resources, make sure that the communities, most marginalized Black and Latinx communities that are kind of doing work with cooperatives, making sure that they have access to both information sources are out there.
Stacey, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is one of the interpreters. Hate to interrupt you, but we're only allowed to do one Zoom call per device, so it's going to take us maybe another 5 minutes to get one device to listen on and one device to interpret on. So I'm going to have to ask for your patience while we get that up and running. I don't want to leave you uninterpreted or leave our listeners in the dark.
Okay.
I'll until I can get my phone up and running and then switch off so we can have one to listen and interpret. So my apologies, and we'll get this as soon as we can.
So I will repeat all of that in about 5 minutes. That's fine.
It's always better when the meeting takes a little bit longer in order to get language justice, incorporated into the meeting.
Absolutely.
And for those folks that were being admitted at the time that was announced, we're just waiting for our interpreters to hop onto a second channel, just so that we can make sure that we have simultaneous translation in between the rooms.
I'll go ahead and interpret that too. Para los oyentes, disculpa, hay un pequeño error. Vamos a tener que esperar un pequeño momento. Estaremos con ustedes en la sala de reunión que está en la ventanilla de chat, pero nos va a tardar un breve momento para usar otro aparato para poder estar en los dos canales. Demos su paciencia, por favor, y estaremos con ustedes a la brevedad. Gracias.
Mike, quick question. Is there a queue for folks that are waiting to get in, or is it, I think it was sold out. Is there a queue?
No, there's no queue on Eventbrite. There was maybe a room on here. So just, as people come up, we're just admitting, but no, there was no one that was waiting to attend.
Okay, I have someone who just sent me a message, said they were looking to get in. Also, are you streaming this on social media?
I don't have the streaming link on the right side here where it normally is. So
Okay.
I actually don't have the opportunity to do that. I can certainly go ahead and initiate a record and put it in the cloud so that we have it to post later.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, so I see Eric in the other room. Are you still pending some things there?
Mike, you want to repeat one more time what's happening for folks just jumping on?
We're just waiting we're setting up the second line for interpretation. The interpreter's on, but we're trying to synchronize the two lines that we need. Should be done momentarily.
Hey there, I just wanted to say there's a few of us here from Portland, Oregon, and it's an extreme privilege to be able to listen in on this. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks for joining. We'll be getting started very soon, I imagine. We probably Okay, for those of you who have just joined, we haven't started yet. We just took a step back so that we can be sure that we have the interpretation line set up. And it's just taking a little longer than we thought. So we're just giving it another moment. I just asked Mike how long, and he said he's checking on it. So again, I imagine we'll start the next 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, Stacy. So yeah, they're ready on the interpretation to begin. If we can just, we'll make another announcement here that interpretation is available on that second line, and I'll renew this chat message. So if you want to proceed there.
Okay, great. So for those who patiently, thank you so much. I think it'll be worth the wait. And for those of you who have just joined, unfortunately, we're starting a little late because we were setting up the interpretation line. And if you look in the chat, you should be able to find that line if you want to hear this conversation in Spanish. But again, thank you all for participating. We're really excited to be in conversation with the Cola Collaborative. And we being the Solidarity Chicago, which is essentially a group of people here in Chicago that have been working in the solidarity economy, broadly defined, working in different capacities. And once the pandemic kind of hit, we realized that we need to do something, and we realized that our communities, Latinx, poor communities, are going to be most severely hurt by the pandemic, and we were trying to think through strategies for bringing resources that we know that are out there to others working in the solidarity economy. So we came together with that in mind, and one thing we decided to do was to engage in these conversations. So this is the second in a series of conversations we hope to have. And we're really excited to be in dialogue with, as I said, the Cola Collaborative, talking about time banking, which is extremely pertinent at this moment. And it's pertinent for all of us, those of us who are just coming to understand what it is, those of us who know what it is. We know that it is a platform that facilitates the community building, the mutual aid that we need now more than ever. So I won't take up too much time. Just to introduce myself, my name is Stacy Sutton, and I, in urban planning and policy at UIC. I also organize with R3 Chicago, which is Resist, Reimagine, Rebuild, as well as CCEC, which stands for the Chicagoland Cooperative Ecosystem Coalition. And the three other people, including Mike, he's the fourth person, that was kind of part that started the Solidarity Chicago will introduce themselves. I'll just turn it over to Renee. You on, Renee? Okay, Camille or Amara, somebody pick up the mic.
Hey, my name is Camille Kerr, and I have a consulting firm called Upside Down Consulting. We just do workplace democracy consulting for unions and academic institutions, nonprofits that want to use worker co-ops as a way to meet their constituents' needs. And we're building a co-op called Shy Fresh Kitchen that is owned, determined primarily by formerly incarcerated Black women, and we do meal production. So just creating daily meals for any kind of institution that provides warm meals, like YM school programs or even courthouses, providing them to jurors. And we're just getting started this month to meet the emergency food needs that have come up during the crisis. Yeah, handing it off to Amara.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to have everyone on the call for this session. My name is Amara Enya, and I have had the privilege of working with Camille and Stacy and Renee and Mike on putting together this series that really has come out of recognizing that there's a need to build different systems in light of everything we've seen over the last couple of months. The question for us was not just how do we respond in the immediate, but how do we actually start to really solidify and create different ways of existing, different ways of being, different ways of working. I've been working in the cooperative space for a number of years now. On the policy side, on the advocacy side, and really trying to diversify the economic ecosystem with cooperatives. I also work with the Public Banking Institute, so on the finance side of things, really trying to make the systemic changes in the economy that we need. So this conversation, I think, is absolutely crucial because we are talking about how to use other cultural and community assets that we have. It's important for us to really think about non-monetary assets that do exist in our community so that we can begin to harness them more effectively. And so I'm excited about the session because it will be us being able to really tap into that and hopefully provide some resources for all of you as you go back into your communities to be able to do and expand on what you're already doing. So thank you. I think Renee, is Renee on?
Yes, I'm on. Can
Okay.
you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I wasn't ready before. Hey, y'all. So I'm Renee Hatcher. I am the director of the Community Enterprise and Solidarity Economy Clinic at UIC John Marshall Law School. Essentially what we do is provide free legal support, both direct support to worker co-ops, other kinds of solidarity economy initiatives, organizations, nonprofit organizations, community-based businesses, and do different kinds of advocacy and legal support more broadly for equitable development and really trying to support an emerging solidarity economy here in Chicago. I am, grateful for this conversation. I think that time banking is certainly a tool that we definitely need to incorporate more into a lot of our work, particularly in this moment. As was said before, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to start and sustain these kinds of conversations is because obviously there's a certain urgency now. We know that our communities are hurting. We know that a lot of people both are suffering a lot of loss just in terms of the folks that we're losing to COVID-19 and the different kinds of emotional, devastation that it's causing, but also that we know people are economically hurting. We know that this virus has just exacerbated all of the inequalities that we see, particularly in Black and Latinx communities and non-documented communities. And so, we wanted to talk about what are the tools? What are people currently doing? How can we lift up what people are currently doing to really address the urgency of this moment, but as Amara said, also how do we rethink and really leverage this moment to build the new systems that we need, to build the kind of economy that we need, to build the kinds of institutions that really are going to serve our people. And, you know, if nothing else, I think what this moment has showed us is the ways in which all of the current mechanisms and institutions just simply are not sufficient, are failing on so many different levels, from everything to our political system, to the way in which obviously we've disinvested from our healthcare system, but also just the ways in which we need to take care of each other. And so I'm really excited for this conversation to talk about how time banking, you know, can be a really important tool for folks in our communities in terms of meeting their material needs, and how do we start to expand our idea of what the economy is and realize that we have more than we think we have to meet our material needs. So with that, I will be quiet and turn it over to Mike, who's going to lead us in this session, and really just want to thank him for all the work that he's been doing in Cola Nut. I'm really excited for this.
All right, thank you all. My name is Mike Strode. I am the founder and coordinator of the Cola Nut Collaborative, you know, but more broadly, writer, thinker, kitchen alchemist. You know, I actually had to run out the door because I'm doing backyard gardening, and I had like 30 cubic feet of soil that were being delivered. So, you know, there's lots of things happening at the same time in this space. And so, yeah, you know, in terms of the founding of the Cola Nut Collaborative, I'm going to switch over to this paper document just so that we can have an agenda in front of us. So we've already touched upon some of those Solidarity Chicago intros. So, you know, I won't spend a whole lot of time there. You know, we'll be going through a few things around the time banking workshop. We'll see, you know, how we can kind of frame this Q&A and get all of that done with closing remarks before the 5:30 hour, because I have to go to a board meeting after this. I'm also a board member at Dill Pickle. So it's a sort of sidebar, but more broadly, who am I? Writer, technology enthusiast, urban cyclist, kitchen alchemist, collaborative social economist, and loose leaf tea drinker. So why are all of those qualities important? Because one of the things that brings time banks alive is the ability for people to actually broaden out what they think of themselves as possessing, as being, the sort of assets and capacities that they see themselves representing. And that's something that we're going to touch upon inside of this space today. And it's something that, you know, I hope that all of us on the line are thinking about. When you think about the sort of skills that you bring to the table, that you bring to space, what are those skills? What are those assets? It's not just your profession, but there are things that you're passionate about. There are things that make you come alive. In fact, as I was preparing for this presentation, I thought of another one that I was about to put on here, which was semi-professional Jamaican folk dancer. I spent about 1.5 years with a company called Pocomania, Horace Brown. And so, you know, those are all things that I bring to space whenever I go. Wherever I go, I bring those qualities and gifts and talents and abilities to space. And those are ways that I want to show up in my community. I don't want to show up in my community as the project manager of technology for, you know, the Illinois Lottery or something like that. That's you know, pretty irrelevant to, you know, the context when I'm on my block in Jeffrey Manor. But, you know, there are skills that make up those qualities in that space that I want represented, you know, when I'm in my community. So that's who I am. And then who are we? Who is the Cola Nut Collaborative? A mutual support network, reciprocal exchange of services, skills, and goods within a time bank framework. We'll talk more broadly about what time banking means and why that's important. But, you know, what's to be known right now is just that this network is about reciprocity. This network is about people being able to exchange their services, their skills, and potentially even goods in a context where the currency is just the hour of time, right? So the hour that I spend supporting and doing something for my neighbor, for someone in the network, for another member is the currency that I earn, that I can bank inside of the time bank, and then I can use that currency to secure something that I need, some services that I need. So I just mentioned that I've got 30 cubic feet of soil that was just delivered to my backyard, and I'm about to lay out 4 garden beds. That's probably going to be quite a bit of work, and I could probably use help with that. And that's certainly going to be something that I'm going to be posting on the Time Bank, because I probably couldn't eat what I would produce on those 4 beds, by myself. And also because it's me recognizing that there are things that I need in this world. There is assistance that I need. There are things that I don't know. I am not a self-sufficient standalone being. I'm part of a community, and time banking helps us to recognize that. So the Time Bank is currently, or it was, an initiative of Cola Community Solutions LLC, which is a social enterprise. But presently, and this is a sort of happy announcement that I'll kind of highlight at the end of this presentation, we are currently moving towards fiscal sponsorship under Open Collective Foundation. So something we just found out this weekend, that if you are on our mailing list, you've certainly seen that. And I'll talk about why that's important a bit later. So the mission of the Time Bank is really just to promote and sustain this robust time banking infrastructure. The entire goal of the Cola Nut Collaborative is to help communities think about ways that they can use this time banking infrastructure to support the exchange, the movement of skills and services amongst members of their community. In communities specifically where there's potentially not as much financial capital, where there are other skills. There's experiential and there's intellectual. There are all these other cultural capital and social capital. There are all these other forms of capital that are represented in these communities. Time banking helps us to activate some of those things and bring them into flow inside of the community. And ideally, basically, we're trying to increase the well-being of the community, right? And so that's the mission. And the vision is really just, again, to acknowledge and to make visible this social infrastructure that exists inside of our communities. So all of these connections that we have, I am connected to the South Darien Manor Community Association, and I live in a community that has a great number of elders. And so, when I'm out in the world, even though, I am not, of the same age, I'm always thinking about what is it that I can do to increase the well-being of my community. And, one of those things that I had been in communication with around my community is an organization called Little Brothers, Friends of the Elderly, which is really about exactly what we're experiencing at this moment: social isolation. So, we know that social isolation is a comorbidity. It's something that can deeply impact our health if we don't have people that we're connected to, that are people that are checking on us, people that call us regularly. So, the Time Bank is really about reinforcing, rebuilding, reiterating, that social infrastructure and making it more visible in the community. So a little bit about the history of the Cola Nut Collaborative. In terms of our history, we are born out of 3 key organizations. One of those is Black Oak Center for Sustainable Renewable Living. The other is Healthy Food Hub, and the third is the Cowrie Collective out of St. Louis. So Black Oak Center for Sustainable Renewable Living was founded around 2005. And it's the Eco Campus is in Pembroke Township, which is near Kankakee. And Pembroke is a historically Black farming community out near Kankakee. And the reason that Black Oak Center was established was because they were attempting to, so they were attempting to really bring some of these community resilience practices that are found, in other spaces, in other communities. They recognized that Black communities were being left out of that conversation. And at the time when they started Black Oaks, the conversation that they wanted to be involved in was about peak oil. So it was about, recognizing that we were sort of hitting a carbon peak, and, the amount of fuel that we were able to extract and pull from the ground was increasing, environmental injustice, was challenging all sorts of ways that we were able to live our lives, in this fossil fuel economy. So recognizing that, this peak oil was one of the challenges that we would face in the future, Black Oaks wanted to bring this conversation about community resilience to these environmental justice frontline communities, to these communities that are faced with the heaviest impacts of the fossil fuel economy. And so they launched an initiative in 2008 called the Healthy Food Hub, which was, again, about connecting a historically Black farming community, a community of lots of small farm holdings in Pembroke, to communities in South and West sides of Chicago that were unable to access fresh produce. So you're solving two sides of a supply chain issue. You're making sure that these communities have access to fresh produce. You're making sure that these small farm holdings have access to market. And then you're building a democratic food system because all parts of that pipeline are represented, that production, that aggregation, and that distribution. And so the Healthy Food Hub was the attempt to really build that food system pipeline, really on a notion, and which is really important for us to think about now, that a regional food system is what is produced within 500 miles of this region, right? You know, and that's important right now because we know that some of us have gone to grocery stores and, you know, perhaps there's not flour there. You know, I know that sometimes you can go to the store and there's no eggs, and other times I was just on the call recently with one of the local food pantries, and someone had 500 eggs, 500 cartons or 500 dozen, you know, eggs that were sitting in a warehouse that were on their way to expiration. So, right, the supply chain is all crazy right now. It's hard to figure out the logistics of how to move food and where food is going. So that's what the Healthy Food Hub was put together to solve. And then the third organization I've mentioned here, Cowrie Collective in St. Louis. So, you know, Cowrie Collective had a very unique approach to time banking. There was a time bank here in Chicago called the Chicago Time Exchange. And that time bank was really centered on the artistic and creative community. And so it didn't have as much reach into the organizing space. It didn't really seem to be tackling the questions of economic justice in a way that really, you know, foregrounded time banking as a solution to some of the economic injustice that communities are facing, right? And so Cowrie Collective was rooted in the social justice practice and an analysis that, you know, these are ways that we can meet some of the unmet needs. So when I saw that model in St. Louis and connected, you know, with the Healthy Food Hub and the ongoing work of Black Oaks, for me, those things clicked. And that's when the Colonet Collaborative was initiated in Healthy Food Hub. And what you see here in this image is just a photo of the sort of yarn exercise, which is this exercise that really helps us to think, how are we connected and how are our skills connected? So this is that visible social infrastructure that I talked about. And you know, and the yarn exercise is something that, you know, any community can do. You know, it's maybe a precursor to the offers and needs market, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But this yarn exercise really just involves getting people together in a circle, having this, you know, massive ball of yarn, and then talking about what is a skill that someone on this circle might need. So, you know, personally, I foreground household budgeting. I really love my spreadsheets. I love to do those numbers. And perhaps there's someone on this circle, perhaps there's someone on this call who needs assistance with household budgeting. You know, feel free to chime in on the chat if that's you. But if you do need household budgeting, you know, then that you would pass that yarn to that next person who needed that household budgeting. They would come up with something that, you know, a skill that they have that somebody might need. So perhaps it's sock mending, you know, who needs, you know, assistance, or a seamstress who can mend socks. Yeah, there's someone over here that has that skill. You know, one person here, you know, Jackie, we were just on a call recently with the Black Oaks Permaculture Guild. And, you know, Jackie has several chickens. In fact, two chicken coops. And so Jackie produces a tremendous amount of chicken manure, rich fertilizer, and a whole lot of eggs. And so, you know, Jackie produces far more chicken manure than she can use in her own garden, far more eggs than she can eat in her own house. Again, time banking is really thinking about how can we use these excess capacities that exist in our communities to enrich, to nourish, to build up the capacity of our communities to do other things, again, to increase the well-being of our communities. So, you know, that's the sort of introduction to the history of our time bank. And I'm just going to do a quick time check for 40. So I'm going to shift over to a sort of brief presentation and just kind of flow through some case studies that I think are very important around time banking. And, you know, just a sort of a bit of Zoom housekeeping, you know, as you have questions, as you have comments, you know, feel free to use that chat to kind of chime in on those things, and, you know, certainly talk to each other and let one another know what you all are thinking. All right, so we've talked already a bit about what time banking is, so I'm going to bypass this. But just in terms of thinking about ways that time banking can be used and ways that time banking both has been used and certainly, you know, we'll get into some ways that the Colonet Collaborative has been thinking about using time banks specific to this moment. But here in the center, we have a young person at a space called Blackstone Bicycle Works. So although I've mentioned that, you know, Chicago Time Exchange was a previous iteration of a time bank in Chicago, Blackstone actually might be Chicago's oldest time banking project. I could certainly be wrong about that, but I don't know if there are enough time banking historians to challenge me. But Blackstone Bicycle Works is rooted in a space called Experimental Station. And in Blackstone Bicycle Works, young people apprentice as bike mechanics at Blackstone. And as they apprentice as bike mechanics, they can earn their way up through different colored aprons, you know, and so you start out with the particular color. I'm actually forgetting. I feel like the first color is black, but I could be wrong. But you apprentice and you move up through these different colored aprons as you learn new mechanic skills. But simultaneously to learning these new skills, you also have the ability to log your hours, to earn a certain number of hours. And once you reach, you know, a particular skill set and you have a certain number of hours that you've worked in the shop, you can go in and pick out any bike that you want, you know, from the inventory. So this is an example here of a community that's looking to kind of use the capacity that it has to solve some of these other multiple challenges. One challenge, young people want transportation, right? I know that I used to love my bike because I could, you know, get a couple of different, you know, several miles away from my house, and you know, and more or less get into nefarious trouble. But you know, so you have young people who need transportation. Young need something to do after school. You have, you know, people who need their bikes fixed. So there are certainly lots of people, you know, there are lots of folks who do cyclocross and different cyclists. I love Blackstone, but this is a way that, you know, a time bank type of infrastructure is being used to meet multiple challenges, and then building skills for these young people who then go on to work as professional bike mechanics at some of the best shops across the city. And also get involved in other sorts of activities. So, you know, this is a way that something like time banking is being used again. And this would be an example, which we'll talk about in a moment, of a sort of an individual to an agency transaction, because there's only one person who's receiving the sort of time credit, which is the organization, which is Blackstone, and the individual is, you know, working at Blackstone. So it's a sort of one-to-one exchange there. So, and some other examples and ways that time banking has been used. So here in the bottom right corner, we use time banking in the Healthy Food Hub to incentivize our members to help stage the market, to help run the market, basically to incentivize them to operate one of the distribution hubs. And this is one of the members of the Healthy Food Hub who was operating the dry goods station and helping to facilitate another member to retrieve some of the dry goods. So again, you know, time banking being used on projects where there's a tremendous social good, but maybe there's not a whole lot of financial return. You know, I know from having worked in the Healthy Food Hub for 10 years that, you know, there's not a whole lot of ways to earn, you know, additional revenue in food. You can certainly, you know, do the value added thing and build out, you know, other canned goods or other sort of meals. But, you know, if you're just selling fresh food and dry goods, there's not a whole lot of margin in that. But it's tremendously valuable to have a space where communities are accessing their food, but they're also accessing communities. So So that's just, two examples of how time banking might be used in a sort of communal context and how they have been used in Chicago. So we've already touched upon our yarn exercise. I'll bypass that. That's an example of Healthy Food Hub and our sort of total model. And so this is a model from the Spice Time Credits out of the UK, just kind of reinforcing and reiterating how time banking works, right? People earn time credits for whatever social projects are listed in the time bank. Whatever things the community needs, people can go and do, and they can earn time credits for that. So in Spice Time Credits, picking up litter, driving a minibus, helping out at a youth club, you can earn time bank credits there. And then in Spice Time Credits, they've actually built a model where they've engaged some of the local business infrastructure, so people can spend their time credits on like a local pool. They can spend them, at some local businesses. They can spend them at community organizations. So there are all sorts of ways that people are doing this sort of earn and spend inside of the time credit infrastructure. Okay, and there's a very specific question on the accessibility of technology, which I will try to get to in a moment. So in terms of the models that time banks can operate under, Coconut Collaborative operates as a person-to-person time bank. We, are just about individuals who want to engage and list their transactions and connect with other individuals to exchange their services. I do fermentation. I want to connect with someone who does gardening. Just list that fermentation service. I can offer fermentation to someone. I can earn my time bank credits. I can spend them looking for someone else who wants to assist with my garden in the backyard. So person to person, Blackstone is that example of that person to agency. And then there are other models where you have this agency to agency exchange, which is when organizations think about using their excess capacity to share with one another. And that's really important for thinking about how you resource some of these small grassroots community organizations. So the South Darien Manor Neighborhood Association has probably never had a budget, an annual budget above $3,000 a year, but it does a lot of work in the community, right? And that work is valuable and meaningful, and we need to figure out ways to resource that work rather than them going out and pursuing additional grants and trying to get money to pay for services. Is it possible that they could connect with other community organizations, to exchange those services? What are the ways that we can exchange with the Resident Association of Greater Inglewood? What are the ways that we can exchange with the Neighborhood Network Alliance in South Shore? These are all sort of ways that agencies should be thinking about resourcing one another. And in terms of just thinking about the core values of time banking, one of the essential values is really just that everyone has something to offer, right? Okay, another specific question about the taxation. I will answer that after the core values. But everyone has something to offer, so everyone has value. Everyone is an asset. Recognizing that there are lots of assets that are underutilized, that are overlooked. When I had a conversation recently with Maida McNeil, who is the arts and culture manager of the Chicago Park District, the reason that she initiated the cultural stewardship program was because she wanted people to look at this really underutilized space of these cultural centers in the Chicago Park districts and really think about how, as a community, they could own the sort of cultural self-determination of that space. Right. So again, these assets that, we have available in our community, not only the sort of physical assets or the built environment, but also the human assets. Everyone has value to offer. And, one of the ways that this has come up in time banking workshops has been that someone had a question previously about elders. And they said, well, what if someone is, an elder and they just can't really get around? What is it that they could offer to the time bank? And we had a generous conversation about, the fact that my grandmother, well into, her centennial years, was a master ceramicist. She could shape near anything out of, the sort of in ceramics. And so it's really critical that we recognize all of the different human assets and the ways that people are valuable and inherently valuable. Conversation is an asset. You know, the ability to be able to check on someone else inside of the community is an asset. The ability to just kind of keep an eye on the community, to the sort of Jane Jacob eyes on the street, you know, theory. Everyone has value to offer. How are we looking at those assets and that value? Redefining work. Recognizing that there's a lot of work that is undervalued by the market. You know, the care of elders is something that has an extremely high cost, but also simultaneous to that, there are workers who are underpaid in that profession, right? So there's these skewed dynamics in terms of how the market values work. And time banking allows us to think about how we revalue and reframe those things that you know should be valued differently. Those things that are really critical to the building of community, to the cohesion of community, to the self-determination of communities. Those are things that, you know, should be defined as real and valuable work, and should be rewarded, should be incentivized for people to participate in those things. So that's the sort of one of the key values of time banking, just redefine work. Reciprocity. So one of the things that I talk about often is the sort of volunteer constructs just being sometimes extractive and also privileged. There are people who have lots of excess time, and then there are people who have no excess time. There are people who can afford to kind of, you know, whose skills are valued in the sort of current volunteer construct, and there are people whose skills are undervalued. So time banking really just keeps us thinking about this sort of reciprocal exchange, right? It should always be a process where, you know, individuals and organizations, as they're drawing on the resources of community, they're thinking about the ways consciously that they're able to give back, that they're able to reinvest, that they're able to re-engage with this larger community. And then these social networks. So people together are stronger than persons apart. Time banking is also, again, similar to the sort of social infrastructure that's in our vision statement. Time banking is really about reinforcing, reinvigorating, revitalizing social networks, and making sure that people are able to access the resources that travel along social networks. There's you know, Nicholas Christakis, you know, an academic who studies social infrastructure or social network theory, really talks about how comorbidity impacts, how the social determinants of health, all of those things travel along social networks. So if we want to increase the total well-being of our communities, it's not sufficient to just kind of, you know, nudge one lever. You kind of have to be pushing on all people at the same time, lifting all people up at the same time, and also, you know, making sure that the social network itself, the connections between people themselves, is strong and cohesive. So those social networks actually increase in the well-being of the potential well-being of communities. And then, you know, finally, that fifth value is respect, just recognizing that everybody has a voice that is owed acknowledgement and dignity. Everyone is looking to be heard. And so time banking, you know, is an opportunity for us to see those voices that often don't get heard, that often are not the loudest, but, you know, to recognize that there's a way to lift them up, to meet those needs, to go to those spaces, and not have to wait for an organization to form to help to nudge us towards that space, but actually to be direct, to say that here's a need that's represented in the time bank that I could go fulfill. I'm going to go and address that, right? And so being able to give voice to those offers and those needs is a really critical part of time banking. And for that reason, if there's anyone who has not launched the time bank, or even if there are folks who have launched the time bank and they don't have a regular offers and needs process, I encourage folks to launch that. And we have an offers and needs market brochure that, you know, I'll highlight, you know, in a few moments, that talks about that process of running an offers and needs market. And I'll kick up past this. Is Nicholas Christakis, and again, I talked about that social infrastructure and social network theory. So that's really important. And so just kind of, you know, summing that up, if we think of these buckets as different social capital networks, so, you know, maybe this bucket is Let Us Breathe Collective. Maybe this bucket is Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group. Maybe this bucket is Black Oaks Permaculture Guild. Maybe this is Chicago Urban Permaculture Salon. These are all different closed social capital networks that all have different resources that are moving within them. And the Time Bank, gives us a way to think about how we do the bridging and the linking between those networks, because ultimately, we want to make sure that all of those different networks have ways to connect with one another, and that the resources that are represented in those networks have ways to travel between those different spaces. And I just named the places that I'm personally connected to, but these could be organizations. These could be the Resident Association of Greater Englewood. This could be the Garfield Park Community Council. This could be, Austin Coming Together. Just a number of different neighborhood organizations that have pockets of resources that other organizations could use, and Time Banking gives us a way to start thinking about moving those resources and circulating those much better. So I'm just double checking the time. So I'm going to cite one, a key case study that I want to highlight before I give you all a glance at the actual website implementation, and I'll get to those questions in the chat as we do this sort of transition. Is the Grace Hill Settlement House. So this was the first modern implementation of the Time Bank in the US. Grace Hill Settlement House launched their member organized resource exchange in 1981. And what was happening in 1981 was that, pardon me, sorry. What was happening in 1981 was this was the Reagan era, and the Reagan budget cuts had come through, right? And so social service agencies were getting slashed in terms of their budgets, and Grace Hill Settlement House was one of those agencies, right? Going back to that sort of legacy settlement house movement, we had the Jane Addams Hall House here, but just something that was in place to help communities that were on the margins, that were marginalized, to get themselves settled, to get their needs met and addressed. So in 1981, when the budget cuts came down, Grace Hill Settlement House was, like other agencies, faced with the choice. They could either just kind of cut those services that they could no longer afford to meet, or they could go in. And Grace Hill, made one of the great pivots in sort of Time Bank history, right? They decided that they wanted to launch a member organized resource exchange, the More Time Dollar Exchange, and basically build a time bank so that members of the community, the folks who were, recipients of services, and often in the sort of nonprofit complex, the nonprofit industrial complex, they're often only seen as recipients of services instead of actual assets, right? Community assets. Grace Hill made that shift. They said, these are people who are assets. These are people who have certain skills, who have certain talents. And if we want to keep these services going, we need to draw upon this larger community and involve them in the process of co-producing these outcomes that we want to see. So, one of the larger projects that they initiated there was the neighborhood college. And the neighborhood college was community members coming in and teaching a skill, and people could certify in the skill that they were learning inside of the Time Bank. So people could use the Time Bank to pay for the courses or pay the instructor, and then they could learn that skill. And then attached to that neighborhood college, they implemented More Temps, which is a temporary worker service. So people were able to certify through the neighborhood college, go into the temporary employment service, get employment. So just kind of bringing it back to being able to move actual financial cap. And then they also implemented a $10 store. So they had, basic toiletries and just, kind of sundries and things that were available at this store that people could use their time dollars to pay for, right? And so there were all these different ways that they were using time banking to, again, draw together the human assets, the human capital of this community, and really build out some ways that they could keep their service levels going. And between 1991 and 2008, 670,000 time dollars were exchanged. If you base that just upon the minimum wage in 2008, that was about $3.5 million. So this is just a way to think about how much capacity we are leaving on the table because we are, because we are not able to engage the sort of assets of communities that time banking actually has the potential to allow us to do. So I'm going to pause for a moment just so that I can address a few of the questions in the chat. Let's see, so Sisby had a question here. My question is regarding the accessibility of technology. It seems that Community Weaver 3 and Our World, which I noticed you use, are the two most viable solutions. However, the technology seems rather clunky and inaccessible. Other more sleek apps like Ying seem not to give enough autonomy control for community organizations. How do you get people to consistently check these pages to engage, and how can people without access to computers participate? Now, that is a super niche question. Obviously, for other folks in the room, this is obviously someone who is potentially running another time bank. So Tisby, feel free to kind of let folks know what your time bank is. But yes, Tisby is accurate, is correct. The technology available for time banking is lacking a lot. And the folks who have built sleeker apps, they do restrict the ways that people who are time bank coordinators engage. And what's really important about time banking that I want to stress is that the platforms that currently exist that allow people who are coordinators of time banks to kind of change a few things in different ways. It's important that communities have the autonomy to incentivize the projects that are important to their community. And so if you have a time bank that gives you a really sleek platform, but doesn't allow you to basically say, I want to give 100 time credits to this food pantry because I want to make sure that that food pantry has the ability to get all of the sort of labor that it needs. Pardon me. Okay. Pardon me. There was a translator in the chat that was making a statement. Yes, if Giosu, if you could send that to then I can if Camille you can just talk to Giosu about the translation. They were saying that the other room is empty, so yeah. Okay. So yes, so if we want to be able to incentivize this food pantry to be able to have access to a number of hours it needs to recruit the volunteers or to recruit people from the community that participate, we want to have the autonomy to be able to do that. And these new platforms that are out, and I'll highlight a few of them in the Dropbox paper document in a moment, but namely Ying, which was mentioned in the chat, but there's also something called Seva app. And I'm going to make this link for the Dropbox available to everyone, so you can kind of click a few of these links later as well to investigate for yourself. So the two main platforms that are popular are Our World's Time and Talents platform, and then Community Weaver 3. So that's what I'll be showing now. I'm going to go ahead and show Community Weaver, but before I do that, I'm going to shift back to box paper. And so here's what I've talked about here. In fact, let me just put this in the chat immediately so that folks have it. All right, so that link that's in the chat will take you to this Dropbox paper document so you can have it for your own viewing later. But the three platforms that are available: Time and Talents by Our World, Community Weaver. Community Weaver is one of the older time banking softwares developed by Time Banks USA, which was originally the Time Dollar Institute way back in the 80s. But Time and Talents was a newer platform that was developed that was adopted previously by the time banks in the United Kingdom, and then but I think they've shifted off of Time and Talents at this point. Several of them have, but basically, these are just platforms that are meant for really one purpose, right? Or one or two purposes. It's meant to have communities be able to engage in the documentation of their exchanges. So being able to post the things that they're able to request or that they're looking to request, and then post the needs that they have. And then also be able to document the exchanges that they have between them. So I'm going to stop the share just so that I can switch over to this other platform and show you the Timebank platform. And before I do that, I just want to make sure that I have this. Okay, so that's a slight answer to your question, Tiz. You know, I know it's an incomplete answer, but I am actively engaged in the process of evaluating lots of different Timebank platforms because I am not satisfied with the ones that are available, but trying to build my own, which I priced out, previously, cost about $5,000. That's or actually no, $50,000 it was. So that's another conversation. And you know, we have talked about here in Chicago, you know, ways that we could think about potentially resourcing, building out a platform that really fully meets our needs. And I'm gonna be happy to continue those conversations with my colleagues on the line. So the in terms of so Anna Maria had a question as well. Who purchased the actual items, the toiletries? You're saying that from savings of people's hours, the agency was able to purchase the toiletries. No, what I'm saying, Anna Maria, is that Grace Hill Settlement House had, you know, items that that people were extending to them. They just kind of built this $10 store as a way to create sort of a total back and forth exchange process where, you know, they could kind of have these items, they could you know, have a $10 store where these items could be purchased by anyone that was on the Timebank. So then you don't get that sort of weird dichotomy where you're trying to figure out, you know, are these items giveaway, and then are you kind of doing a sort of needs-based giveaway, or do you kind of give to everyone? So it was a community that was, again, trying to solve a problem. The problem that it was trying to solve was incentivizing people to participate in this neighborhood college, and this was just one of the ways that they built a sort of incentive structure around that. So that's my explanation of it. But you know, there are people that were actually on the project on the ground that may be able to tell you a much more nuanced narrative of how that worked. Okay. All right, so just looking at the platform that exists here. So again, we use a platform called Time and Talents, Our World. And that platform is, you know, again, the platform is called Time and Talents. The organization is called Our World. Our World was a time bank that existed in Portland, Maine. And they built a software for their own time bank that other time banks, you know, saw, liked, and then began using. So we've got 121 members here, as you can kind of see on our front end, 995 hours exchanged. And then, you know, you have a sort of information page, local exchange news, just, you know, ways to communicate out to members of the time bank what's going on. Okay, and so in terms of when members log into the time bank, and this is going to be a really incomplete time bank orientation because, you know, we want to make sure to honor time, you know, no pun intended. And so, you know, be a very brief explanation of how this time bank works. I have a much larger or much broader explanation or a full video that kind of goes through all of the functionality of here, and it's in a link in that Dropbox paper document, so I'll highlight that in a moment. But on the front end of the time bank, you've got, you know, some information about your hours. You kind of got your name when you've logged in. You've got a toolbar up here that kind of takes you to an hours page, your offers and requests, your list of members, and just gives you the ability to kind of do a few different things. First up here, you'll have the opportunity to post an announcement. If you just have something you're trying to announce to other members of the Time Bank, that there are ways to do that through this platform. Over on the right, you've got the actual Time Bank's announcements. So those things are listed there. And then you've got this new requests and new offers section here, which kind of, is where members would post the things that they're requesting, post the things they're offering. They would appear here in this new request and offers section. So meeting facilitation is among the offers, Spanish tutoring is among the request, nonprofit consultation, among offers that folks have. So these are all sorts of things that people can engage with and draw from when they come into the Time Bank. Here there's options for endorsing. If you've had a really good transaction, you can endorse a person. You can reply. You can just that reply just kind of sends an email out letting them know that you're interested in building an exchange or scheduling one. They're a place to record hours with that member. So if you've had an exchange and you want to record the hours, you can do that here. Then there are options for adding a request or offer. If you've seen this category and you're like, hey, I've got nonprofit consultation skills, I forgot about that. You can add that as an offer in your own, within your own records. And then there are ways to explore all of the offers here on the Time Bank. So you can browse the offers directory, and there are members that are offering a vast array of things. Someone has modeling experience. There's some folks that have audio recording and video recording experience. So there are lots of different things that people can be engaged with. And those things are visible on the Time Bank. So when people post to this Time Bank, it goes out in a weekly email, a weekly communication. Again, it's not as sort of stealth, as perhaps having sort of a Slack instance. But again, those are things that we're looking towards inside of the collaborative. As we think about, as we test, so effectively what we operate as is a space to kind of test some of these platforms, to test these tools, and then make them better, improve them, right? So build out, new that allows communities to do what Time Banking is intended to do, which is incentivize participation in new social projects and in other endeavors that are happening around the community, especially, in places where a lack of money is sort of, might be a barrier, might be a hindrance, might be an issue. So the offers in the request section, very similar. Again, I won't go through every function, but then there's also the member section, which I'll highlight, which is where, you could see the list of members. And then there's even sort of filtering so that, this is a citywide Time Bank, and perhaps, I bike, everywhere in the city. So, I'm probably not exchanging with anyone that's 20 miles away. But, unless it's something that I don't require to be in person. So, you can actually kind of filter who are the people within 5 miles of me, who are the people that I can kind of connect with and build relationships there. There are options for you to do that filtering within the Time Bank infrastructure. So that's a small glimpse of the Time Bank platform. Again, I won't be able to give the full glimpse, but I will show you where you can find that in the Dropbox information that I've provided. So in this list of resources, I've built out this community, this Time Banking and Social Capital Toolkit. So if you were to click on that, that would take you to a space where you could see, the full infrastructure, as well as the training video that is given out to members so that they can kind of explore and understand, what options are available in the Time Bank. Also in that list of resources, you'll find the 2-year journey of the Cola Nut. That's the much broad long-term history of the Cola Nut Collaborative, going back, to our initial sort of early inklings. Okay, yeah, there's Anna Maria has addressed the taxation question. So I'll jump to this taxation question that Anna Maria has posted in the chat. Time banking is not taxable, according not to a sort of formal IRS ruling, but basically a letter. This letter is available in a PDF. We keep it in our coffers, in our sort of storage archives. But yeah, time banking is seen by the IRS as a favor, so they don't really deal with any sort of taxation. And so that's also why, if you've ever been in a conversation with me and, you know, you've said time banking is bartering, and I've said, well, time banking is not actually bartering. Bartering is taxable. Time banking is not. You know, basically, you know, I don't even know if how the IRS could manage the sort of taxation of time banking, but, you know, I won't actually try to do that thought exercise. But that's the direct answer to your question, Anna Maria. Okay, so you've got that resource list, the time banking toolkit. You've also got this link tree that's got some other information, some other resources on there. I'll encourage you to kind of take a glance at those. There is the offers and need market brochure. So I talked a bit about the offers and needs market as being one way that our time bank has dealt with imparting the practice of time banking, because ultimately the platform is important. To this question, the platform is really important for how people engage, but it's not actually the most important thing for starting off the activity of time banking. The most important thing is, do people have a practice around always engaging in a sort of offers and needs exchange whenever they are in the room with one another? So this is something that I've been doing engaged in with the Black Oaks Permaculture Guild. Something that we've engaged in at Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group, something that, you know, has been engaged in lots of different spaces where I've participated recently, because ultimately in this very moment, in this sort of COVID-19 moment, it's more important than ever that you know what skills are represented in your community, because we can't get out of our communities, basically. I mean, you could, but, you know, I mean, do you want to? Do you have to? But it's really important that people understand the sort of hyper-local context in which they live and what's available, what skills their neighbors have. And, you know, there's a quote by Adrienne Marie Brown's sister, Autumn Brown, on their podcast, which, you know, when they were talking on one of their early, okay, yeah. There's another question in there. I will come back to that. So there's a question or statement that Autumn Brown made about the about apocalypse, right? You know, so of course their podcast is How to Survive the End of the World. So they were talking about, you know, in a crisis, in a sort of, you know, disaster, what is the most important thing that you have? You know, is it blue jeans? Is it guns? Is it butter? I don't know. But, you know, what Autumn Brown stated was that it's important that you know who you live next door to, right? It's important that you know what their skills, what their gifts, what their talents, what their capacities are, and that you both understand what your mutual needs are, what's sort of, you know, what are the things that are going to be needed in this community if a disaster strikes, and, you know, maybe the food supply chain breaks down or something like that, you know, or maybe something kind of, you know, something else, you know, prevents the sort of access to the neighborhood. What are the ways that we actually have to support each other? And that offers and needs market is a really critical and important process that you can go through in any organization that will help you kind of navigate those things. And then the time bank is really just there to ultimately give you a place to put those things. So once you've actually done the mapping together in community and company, once you've built the sort of network, then you can kind of go to the time bank and you can document that stuff until you get a better platform, you know. But, you know, right now you kind of go with the one you have. But the more important process, again, is that people are meeting one another and understanding what this sort of network of needs are. So inside of this brochure, this is a PDF. It's embedded in this Dropbox document, but, you know, this is a PDF that you can download and take with you and print off, and it's printable in sort of booklet formats. That's fine too. But the offers and needs market basically is a way that people can kind of, you know, start that process of thinking, what are the things that I have to offer? What is it that I would like in exchange for those things? And then how urgent, you know, or how available, you know, if it's an offer, how available am I to provide that offer? If it's a need, how urgent is that need? So, you know, one of the things that I always kind of talk about, you know, with my fermentation is that my name is Mike Strode. I know how to ferment. I can do kefir, kombucha, sauerkrauts, pickling, you know, all of those sorts of things. I'm available as scheduled, you know, to show you that process. and then I'm looking for 2 time credits or 2 COLA inside of our time bank in exchange for for providing you with that support or that service of learning how to ferment. And then, conversely, if it's a need, my name is Mike Strode. I have laid down 4 garden beds, and I've got my paper mulch all put out, but I've got 30 cubic feet of soil that I have to fill into these 4 beds. And that's going to take me a while. And I am looking for assistance. I'm willing to offer you 4 COLA, 4 time credits in exchange for your assistance, helping me to fill those garden beds. And that need is not urgent. So that's an example of sort of the offers and needs market. You usually go through an offers round first, just getting people to kind of pitch out those offers. And you really want to make sure that people don't stop doing the offers, because that's that part of that asset inventory. That's people mining their personal inventory to understand what they have to offer. And then, you'll do a switch later on, and you'll switch into the needs portion, the needs pitch. And at that point, you'll start kind of talking about what are the things that you need, and that might prompt you to kind of do some self-reflection. What is it that I need? What do I need? What do I have? Okay, so this private question here from, let's see, we have the taxation question. Yeah, so we've addressed the taxation question. It doesn't count as in-kind. Where can you learn about barter taxation? I don't have resources for you, Sko, on the barter taxation. I looked at it and then I just kind of put it away because I wasn't doing a barter network. But if you go to any of the formal barter networks, there are some barter platforms. Any of those barter platforms that you build out on, they'll have a taxation function because you have to pay taxes on barter, and usually those are valued at whatever the U.S. dollar amount is, because a good has a specific dollar amount attached to it by somebody, and so basically that's why it's taxable for barter. And that to kind of go to Anna Maria's next question: who values the amount of cola nuts something is worth? In time banks, I'll go back to the beginning of this brochure. In time banking, 1 cola equals 1 hour. And so in time banking, the sort of egalitarian nature is rooted in everyone's hour is the same. So the 4 hours that you engage in helping me with the backyard garden is the equivalent of the 4 hours that I spend coaching someone through fermentation is the equivalent of the 4 hours that someone spends, doing a call into the sort of network of elders in the community. All of those hours are equal, because ultimately all of that work, redefining work, the values of time banking, all of that work is critical and important to building the cohesion and the well-being of the entire community. And ultimately, if we're trying to cultivate well-being for the whole community, then we won't do this thing that the market economy does, which is create all of these weird inverse valuations where caretakers, who provide services for elders are underpaid, but the administrators and the sort of executives at the corporation are overpaid. That's what we're doing. We're doing equitable exchange here. So let me see where I am on time. It is 5:24. So I will jump down to these action items. And I'm going to highlight, there was a lot of questions that came in over Eventbrite. I probably can't do anything with these questions now. What we will do is make sure that these questions are embedded here in the Dropbox. I will probably put some answers in here later. But this document is a document you can comment on. So, feel free to drop a comment in here later if the question is not adequately answered. I don't really have a way to tag you if, once I put an answer into the question, but I just won't be able to get to them now. So, just know that that's the case. Yeah, and then Deidre noted here in the chat, to echo what has been said, this is a process that really takes a while to cultivate. We are repositioning ourselves in the offers and needs market as having value and having needs that individuals can fill and not businesses. And, there's some more highlighted there about, being committed to this over time. And that is one of my comrades in arms from Co-op for Lib. So yes, thank you for that note, Deidre. So these action items, this first one is mostly for folks who are in Chicago. I know there are folks who are on here from other places. I wouldn't necessarily encourage you to join the ColaNet Collaborative, because I'm sure there's a time bank locally that you can join, that you can participate in. But yes, join the time bank. This is a perfect time to join the time bank. This is a perfect time for folks to begin this tool. Perhaps there are other tools out there, but being in conversation with the ColaNet Collaborative about the tool that is here, and whatever other tool you might be thinking about using, ultimately allows us to again, expand our view. So the more you know, the more you know. So there are a lot of people that I know that are interested in developing better platforms. But if you simply kind of take this training and go out and attempt to sort of cultivate your own platform, you might not have benefit of the knowledge that I have about those other people. And so, that this is an opportunity to kind of think about how we pool our resources and our assets and our inventories here. Then do a personal inventory. So, we've just done that with the offers and needs market. What do I have? What do I need? Who do I know? How can we share? That's that personal inventory that you have to do. Hopefully you're already doing it. Hopefully this time has prompted you to do it much more frequently. But yeah, do that personal inventory. Learn the practice. So, this market that I've highlighted is already in the book. Oh, excuse me. So yes, take a look at the offers and needs market. It's thoroughly explained there, and I'm also available for questions. If you kind of need assistance with facilitation. There is also a much more robust training that's coming up with the Post Growth Institute. So that's where I actually borrowed the model from. And so I'm happy to kind of share that information momentarily. The pod mapping. So also in that book, and this is something that's gone out inside of the mutual aid work that's been happening, pod mapping. So just knowing, we talked about that close social capital network. Who are the sort of primary 6 people that are in your network. Thinking about sort of how your pod expands, so who are the people that you are connected to? Who are the people that they are connected to? And what are the organizations, the entities? What are the links, that people are connected to here? And so that pod mapping comes from the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. And then finally, there's this Posturity Budgeting by Dragon Whisperer. Thank you for coming. And there's the Posturity Budgeting. Posturity Budgeting comes from Stephanie Rearick's Mutual Aid Network. And it's really about us thinking about our budget as all of the different ways that we can exchange. So what are the things that, we can exchange through swapping? What are the things that we can exchange through time banking? What are the things that we can exchange, or what are the things that we can acquire? So what can we acquire through swap? What can we acquire through time banking? What can we acquire through barter? What can we acquire through a local community currency? So Posturity Budgeting encourages us to, this is a permaculture practice, to be more resilient about the ways that we think about, resources and abundance, right? And access to those things, and really start to build out different channels that people can use to go and get the things that they need, right? So that's what Posturity Budgeting is about. So these are all practices that are highlighted in that brochure. I encourage you to kind of review those. Share the vision. So, imagine what this infrastructure could make possible, right? Just, take a moment to kind of envision what it looks like when people have a multitude of different ways to meet their needs. Perhaps perhaps you have to pay your rent, your utilities, your transportation in cash. That's great. But once you do that, how do you get the other things that you need met? And that was actually one of the driving forces around Chinyere Ote, who started the Cowrie Collective. Started it because she was a new mother and she wanted to cut back on her hours at work, but she didn't want to reduce her quality of life. So she looked at the time bank as a way to build out, and engage with her social networks so that the things that she needed could be acquired through friends, through, families, through associates, through organizations. And the time bank was kind of formed of that notion, right? Tell your neighbors, so engage in that community co-visioning. That's really important, just kind of think about, again, available in your network, and what can we accomplish if we come together and build out this infrastructure, and then, assemble a core team to kind of help activate that vision. And, again, this is a citywide time bank. So, the ways that the ColaNet Collaborative exists is to support communities that want to implement time banking, and provide them an infrastructure in which they can do that, so that, we don't necessarily have to have every neighborhood, every one of the 77 community areas in Chicago implement the time bank. We can build out a hub that exists inside of our world, and that presents a place for us to kind of share a piece of infrastructure, and also share other resources. The ColaNet Collaborative has built the technology stack that includes, Zoom and Uber Conference, and access to lots of other things. These are not things that I'm going to use on a daily basis, or that anyone else in the collaborative is going to use on a daily, but we could share those resources, right? If they are useful. Meet regularly. So there's a monthly time salon that we have been doing in person at Floods Hall. Of course, we're not doing it in person now, but we are doing a virtual time salon this Friday. I still have to build out the Zoom, the event, so that people can log in. But the last virtual salon didn't turn out so bad, so I'm going to go ahead and try a virtual salon again this month, just so that we can kind of keep some of the momentum and keep people engaged and meeting one another. And then this sort of big announcement that, I've highlighted, we are now a fiscally sponsored project of Open Collective Foundation. So this means that member contributions and other gifts to the network are tax deductible, if that's something that's important to you. Ultimately, I was not personally interested in participating in the process of founding a nonprofit organization, but there were certainly reasons that the ColaNet Collaborative Time Bank needed to have a sort of, nonprofit infrastructure behind it. So this is a sort of way to kind of, the best of both worlds, right? So you can go ahead and click on this link here, and you'll find our Open Collaborative page, where you can kind of you can see what the sort of membership options look like. In terms of this sort of joining process now, we'll be doing something similar to what happened with a few of the other networks that joined, both Hive and the Black Oaks Permaculture Guild and all of those sorts of things, which is that there's sort of we can talk about in the orientation and the sort of monthly orientation, or in your personal member orientation, what these sort of memberships look like. But there are, real expenses for hosting a website for the Time Bank and things like that. So there are some things that the Time Bank has to pay in money. So there are some sort of membership contributions that we would like folks to make. Everything around here is voluntary, but what sort of holds up the infrastructure is both the services that members provide in terms of participating in like the advisory and kitchen cabinet type of things, but also the sort of member contributions that kind of hold up this network, which is why it's beneficial that we've shifted to fiscal sponsorship, because previously the LLC where I do my consulting work was basically footing the bill for this entire pilot. So yeah, this is a good change. All right, so there's my contact information that is on this document. I'll say goodbye to the person on the iPhone that's leaving. Thank you for coming. And again, I'll put some answers to these Eventbrite Q&As, in that document later. Now it's at 5:34, but we can open up for some brief, because I will have to go to a board meeting shortly. But if there are brief questions I can answer, or other ways that we can kind of engage, happy to offer those. Okay, all right. I see some folks logging off there. Thank you, Ania. So any sort of questions? Why Our World versus Community Weaver? I chose Community Weaver basically because I chose Our World because Community Weaver at the time was shifting to some sort of paid model, and it was a model that I didn't quite understand, or it wasn't something that was feasible for us to pay for at the time. So Yeah, so that's the only reason, just because our world had a free platform. There could be other motivations for going different ways. Are there other questions that I can answer for anyone now, or do my co-host want to hop in and offer any sort of remarks?
I'll just hop in and just thank you, Mike. That was wonderful. I think we got a lot of positive comments, and thank you for sharing the Dropbox materials, because folks should go in and read stuff more. Mike's contact information is there. And also, stay tuned. We meaning Solidarity Chicago, will hope to be having just on time banking, but broadly on the solidarity economy and things happening and to organize for Chicago, ways of creating and strengthening our solidarity networks, and with a particular interest in work on cooperative. So we'll continue to have conversations, and I'm really appreciative that you took time out of your day to share with us. Mark, you want to say anything?
No, I want to thank Mike for a really in-depth presentation. I think it was excellent for those who are just joining, trying to figure out what time banking is, and also for those who may be engaged in some way. I thought it was really, even though there's a lot more that could be said and discussed, and some questions that can still be answered. Again, this is, we want this to be an ongoing conversation. So we want to be able to provide this kind of, at least to get things going throughout the city, and really throughout, since we have some folks that are apparently from out of state on this call too. So I just want to really thank Mike for the presentation, for your commitment also to doing this work. You've been really diligent. I also want to thank everyone who tuned into this session, and encourage you to definitely stay involved and keep an eye out for the sessions that we'll be putting together after this one.
All right, and I'll answer DS's question here, talking about the academic relationships here and how other nonprofits are involved. There might be some clarity I'll need on that question, but I know that there wasn't a question that came in the Eventbrite about whether or not organizations can join. There is an membership inside of the Time Bank, so organizations certainly can join. There are a few organizations that are represented within the Time Bank who are posting the things that they need, who are posting, the things that they are available to offer. That's certainly something that I'm looking to build out over the coming year, so that organizations are part of the fabric of community along with individuals. So being able to have a diversity of these things represented, a diversity of resources available in the Time Bank is it only makes that Time Bank network stronger. All right. All right, so we are at 5:38. Are there other folks who want to make closing remarks, or are there other that should be posited here?
Mike, do you have a sense of when the recording will be available on the cloud for folks who didn't get a chance to tune in to be able to access?
It's usually within an hour or so that the recording go. Yeah, it should be an hour.
Awesome.
Oh, and it looks like Renee is recording. So yeah, so Renee, you'll get that recording where I guess on your account.
Yeah, and we can send it out. If you register, we'll just send it in a mass email.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Mike.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Thank you all. Yes, you will get a communication since you registered on Eventbrite. We have the addresses. We can send